and it was in the last couple of weeks. There's two or three other people there as well. But the work that's been done to help assist those people off the street, most people don't choose to sleep on the street, and so with the different agencies here in Nelson, they've been helped.
Okay, be interesting to see if he turns up on the street again. All right, so the problem's gone away in the meantime, and thank you, Simon Duffy in Nelson. It is interesting because there are his supporters who want us to tolerate a degree of eccentricity on the streets. I suppose
eccentricity's fine, but when it's causing problems for other people, as in the shopkeepers, it does cause a problem. And I mean, one of the interesting things in New Zealand is most councils have hawkers licences. So if you want to busk or anything like that, you've got to actually go and get a hawker's licence, but there doesn't seem to be that for beggars.
Dave Dobbins, great New Zealand anthem, Welcome Home, in Māori now for Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori, Māori Language Week. Here's Dave. Oh, that was a nice idea anyway, to have Dave. And you can listen
Dave.
You can listen to Dave singing the Māori version online. The movie Moana is out in Te Reo. Trade Me's introduced a Te Reo option for its iPhone app. ANZ ATMs now allow users to perform banking tasks in Te Reo as well. What does Māori Language Week mean to both of you, please? Can I ask?
You go, Barry.
Okay, well, with me, it's one that I'm kind of ashamed of, that I'm not as proficient in Te Reo as I should be. And, I mean, that's bad. As a guy that was in broadcasting for 30 years, I should be far better than I am. And it's something that my children have had a go at me about. And that's one of the good things about it. The younger generation seems to be really proficient in lots of areas of Te Reo, and they are quite strong in their support for it.
Would you be like Dave, and I think he's intending to achieve a greater degree of proficiency by the time he's 70?
Hey, listen, I have trouble learning English, let alone learning Te Reo as well, but at my age. But
okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to learn more, and I wish that I had at an earlier age. But then again, I also wish that I'd learned other languages as well. And I really feel admiration for these people that can speak 4 or 5 languages. I really admire them.
Emma?
I've agreed with you this entire hour, Barry. I think
something's wrong.
Something's wrong. You have to. Yeah, this is the last time they'll let us come on together. I think the point about the generational change is the thing that gives me the most hope. It's our children don't have the kind of baggage around te reo that some of the older generations do, and I think they will, really promote this and change future generations' appreciation of the language and level of comfort with it. We just need to make sure they're supported to do that. We've done this in our own household. My husband's been learning te reo. He's a Pākehā New Zealander from Christchurch. Didn't have any exposure growing up, and he is motivated because we want our daughter to go to a bilingual kura, and have full immersion and be multilingual. This is the thing. It's a gateway to other languages as well. So not only is it as important as our national language, but it makes it easier to learn others as well. So,
just out of interest, you've written quite movingly about your dad and your upbringing. Where is that? It was on the Newsroom website, or the Newsroom?
Yeah, Newsroom, everywhere, all day.
Thank you both for the panel today. Hei kōrera to Barry Corbett and Emma Espiner, and we are back tomorrow with the panel and Checkpoint now.
Ko te mairai hoa mai he kōrero, kei te haere, he kaupapa, kei te karawhiua. Kia ora, te reo Māori. Irma makes landfall in Florida. We're looking at that on Checkpoint tonight. Catastrophic damage in its wake. Winston Peters puts a stake in the ground over any post-election deal with Labor. We retrace national leaders building the steps and find out what kind of houses a family can buy in Auckland's highly promoted Hobsonville Point. The National and ACT parties receive a frosty reception at a meeting with families of suicide victims. The Christchurch Airbnb is gutted, and thousands gather on the streets of Wellington today to celebrate the beginning of Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. A woman who stole nearly $2.5 million from Hamilton's Sky City Casino and a local school has been sent to prison for nearly 8 years. Tessa Grant defrauded the casino of $1.9 million and took just under $800,000 from Waikato Diocesan School. The Crown Prosecutor, Ross Douch, told the Hamilton District Court the 41-year-old committed a massive breach of trust and showed no remorse. Mr Douch stressed to Judge Philip Connell just how blatant her offending was.
On a single day, this defendant took $120,000 cash out of the Sky City reserves for her own purposes.
Ross Douch said Grant had expensive tastes and some of the money went on 2 horse trucks worth more than $700,000. Labour's leader Jacinda Ardern says it's wrong for a National MP to link her stance on euthanasia with comments she made about youth suicide. Ms Ardern told a rally at Parliament yesterday it was devastating that more than 600 New Zealanders killed themselves last year. She also spoke of her best friend's brother who took his own life when she was 13. In a post on Facebook, National Simon O'Connor said it was strange that Ms Ardern was so concerned about youth suicide but was happy to encourage the suicide of the elderly, disabled and sick. Ms Ardern says she respects the personal views of individual MPs on euthanasia.
But to confuse the issue of euthanasia with New Zealand's staggering and devastating suicide statistics is just wrong. These are 2 very different issues that we're debating and discussing.
Jacinda Ardern. Simon O'Connor hasn't responded to a request for comment, but his leader, Bill English, has distanced himself from the MP's remarks. Mr English says the 2 issues shouldn't be linked, and he's texted Mr O'Connor to tell him that. Meanwhile, Bill English says he shares Winston Peters' concerns about Labour's tax plans. The New Zealand First Leader says he'll form a government with Labour only if he's told what the full scope of the party's tax plan is. Jacinda Ardern is refusing to budge, saying her party has been upfront about its plans to establish a tax working group and she'll wait for its recommendations before proposing any tax changes. Mr English says National agrees with Mr Peters about Labour's need for transparency.
What they're asking the public to do is to vote for a committee in this election to decide one of the most critical issues for our economic success, and that is how the tax system works. They're asking New Zealanders to hand them their ATM card and they'll give it back in a year when they've decided how much to spend.
Bill English. And a group of Central Otago farmers is challenging the Labour leader to visit their farms and discuss the party's water tax plans. The group of women, known as Water Maniatoto, say they can't afford a royalty on irrigated water, planned at 1 or 2 cents per 1,000 litres of water, and it could drive some off their land. Francine Hoare, who farms sheep at Patearoa, says she supports fixing up the nation's waterways, but many farmers are doing everything they can already. Ms Hoare says Labour needs to front up.
I'd like Jacinda Ardern to turn up in the Maniatoto and come and have a cup of tea with me and talk to me about how she thinks this policy is right, how this looks like Labour, how this has gone against what I believe Labour to be.
Francine Hoare says Labour should be going hard after farmers who are polluting waterways instead of taxing farmers doing the right thing. A weakening but still potent Hurricane Irma is lashing Florida's Gulf Coast, leaving millions of homes and businesses without power and widespread flooding. Irma's been downgraded to a Category 2 storm, but forecasters are warning it remains dangerous as its 175 km/h winds tear off roofs and topple power poles. Coastal areas are getting storm surges of nearly 5 metres. 1 death has been confirmed and an estimated 170,000 people remain in 650 emergency shelters. In Miami, a huge storm surge caused major flooding and 2 cranes collapsed in the high winds. The city manager for North Miami, Larry Spring, says the storm is moving away, but the danger still exists.
The risk of down power lines, trees, debris, and actually in our city, still some coastal flooding still exists. 80% of my city is without lights, so the street lights aren't working, the signal lights aren't working, so we just ask everybody to stay home.
North Miami City Manager Larry Spring. Irma killed at least 28 people as it raged through the Caribbean on its way to Florida. The damage bill in the islands could top $16 billion. It's 5 past 5. To sport, and the former world #1 Mats Wilander believes Rafa Nadal is hungrier than Roger Federer and will overhaul his Swiss rival's Grand Slam tally and become the most decorated player ever. Nadal has trounced South African Kevin Anderson in straight sets in a one-sided final in New York to claim his 16th major, 3 shy of Federer's record. After being plagued by injury in recent years, Nadal's pleased to be at the top of his game.
Unbelievable what happened this year, after a couple of years with some troubles, injuries, some moments playing not good. Since the beginning of the season have been very, very emotional because close the Grand Slam year, winning here in New York, that's unbelievable.
Rafa Nadal. The next America's Cup will be mono-hulls and not the flying catamarans of the last couple of campaigns, according to the Italian challenger of record, Luna Rossa. Luna Rossa boss Patrizio Bertelli has confirmed the move back to monohulls in an interview with an Italian newspaper. Bertelli says the move back to monohulls was a condition of Luna Rossa helping Team New Zealand win the last America's Cup in Bermuda. Team New Zealand are scheduled to unveil their plans for the 2021 America's Cup later this month. That's the news.
Hello, I'm John Campbell. What about the selection campaign? Human rights, renters' rights, dirty rivers, dirty politics.
Are you keeping count of the billions of dollars being promised? We are. I'm Guy Espiner.
And I'm Susie Ferguson. Who has to pay and who will have the say? Follow the money on Morning Report.
And counting the votes on the 23rd of September.
And the morning after with me and Catherine Ryan, RNZ National Election 17.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel. Showers, possibly squally and thundery with hail, easing this evening. Isolated showers tomorrow. Waikato and Waitomo, also the central high country. Scattered showers, some possibly heavy with hail, easing this evening. Isolated showers tomorrow. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Showers, some possibly thundery with hail today, then fine. Taranaki and Whanganui to Wellington, also Wairarapa. Fine spells, isolated showers clearing this afternoon, but returning tomorrow afternoon. Nelson, Buller, Marlborough and Westland, mainly fine, isolated showers clearing this evening, but returning tomorrow morning. Canterbury and Otago, mainly fine, but the odd shower possible about Banks Peninsula. Fiordland, Southland, Clutha and Dunedin, showers easing today and clearing later tomorrow. And the Chatham Islands, showers, some heavy with hail, easing this evening, showers returning tomorrow. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. Welcome to the program. Everyone, coming up on Checkpoint tonight, show me your tax policy, says Winston Peters to Labor. We visit the government's pin-up development, Hobsonville Point, in search of affordable housing, working for a political response to the country's devastatingly high suicide rate, and the school ball made magic and affordable by an entire community. But we begin tonight with Irma. After lashing the Caribbean, causing catastrophic devastation across the British and American Virgin Islands and Barbuda, Hurricane Irma has made landfall on the US mainland, bringing threatening winds, a massive storm surge and knocking out power to more than 3 million homes. The monster storm struck the Florida Keys as a Category 4 hurricane overnight, but has since been downgraded to a Category 2, with sustained winds of about 170 km an hour as it continues to pound Florida's west coast. Cuba, less lucky. Parts of the capital, Havana, have been turned into canals due to storm surge flooding, and widespread damage has been reported in coastal communities and tourist resorts all along the north of the island. Bridget Burke begins our coverage.
Emergency officials rescued dozens of residents in low-lying areas of Havana as Hurricane Irma breached the city's famed Malecon sea wall, bringing 11-metre waves and smashing businesses along the seaside. Firefighters and rescue personnel led families out by foot and boat from deadly storm surges. Cuban officials say Irma uprooted trees and tore off roofs, packing winds of 200 kilometres an hour and bringing the highest sea surges the country has ever seen. Moving on and downgraded to a Category 4 before being upgraded and downgraded once again, Irma set her sights on the Florida Keys, knocking out electricity to 3 million homes and businesses statewide, flooding streets and swaying skyscrapers. At a Miami airport hotel, evacuees like Catalina Herzog hunkered down, waiting for Irma. Ms. Herzog said she chose to evacuate after her home lost power and the winds picked up.
It blows my mind that you know, we're feeling these effects, and the eye is, what, I don't know, 200 miles away.
When the wind and rain did come, it came with a vengeance, with floodwaters reaching 3 metres high, 3 blocks back from Miami Beach. Veronica Fernandez filmed what looked like a river outside her apartment's lobby.
This is the situation right now. Around Brickell Bay, the water from the bay has started to go inside the buildings, the lobby of the buildings. You can see the level of the water has reached such a high point. The water hydrant is almost covered completely.
As the weakening Category 3 storm crept up Florida's west coast, Tampa residents walked on the sea floor. Irma's force was still so strong it pulled water from Tampa's shores.
I've never seen it empty like this before, but I've seen it flooded plenty of times. I've never seen nothing like this.
Irma then barreled towards Florida's west coast, towards Naples.
You know, we had a tornado or a funnel cloud come over and hit some of these manufactured homes right here off of US 1 by Port Malabar Boulevard. 6 of them damaged and like 3 devastated.
US President Donald Trump huddled with his cabinet at Camp David over the weekend, holding a teleconference with the governors of Florida, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina and Tennessee as they prepared for the worst.
We just returned from Camp David. The president's been monitoring this storm 24/7. And the people of South Florida, the people of the entire state should know we are with you. The president has directed the full resources of the federal government to be brought to bear to support the efforts of Governor Scott and state and local officials across Florida, and we will continue to do that. Wherever Hurricane Irma goes, we'll be there first.
4 people have now been confirmed dead in Florida, including 2 police officers. More than 100,000 people tonight remain in emergency shelters, awaiting news of what has now been downgraded to a Category 2 tropical storm. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
Meanwhile, islands across the Caribbean, some of whom simply don't have money to rebuild, are trying to pick up the pieces after Irma left behind a trail of destruction and killed up to 30 people. Many small islands were hammered by the storm, which hit them as a Category 5. And damage has been described as unprecedented. The BBC's Laura Bicker is on Tortola in the British Virgin Islands, and she filed this report.
The British Virgin Islands look like they've been hit by the blast wave of a bomb. On the biggest island of Tortola, houses have been ripped apart and contents scattered for miles. An over 20-foot wave surge crushed boats, beaching them among the rubble.
It started off with wind.
Oren Glasgow was at home as Irma hit.
My mom's room, the roof came off. Then my bedroom came off. We went to the living room. Glass started to burst. We had all of this boarded up.
You've lost everything?
Everything.
People talk about the winds that came through here as if they were alive, as if it come from another world. And now, 5 days after the hurricane struck, they're in desperate need of food, of shelter and clean water. Others are just simply desperate to leave. The shock of seeing this terrifying force of nature is overwhelming. Some are trying to fly home to relatives in the UK. The Masson family made it to this shelter after neighbours with machetes hacked through debris to help them hike from their damaged home.
We don't know what planes are going or when they're going. Literally this morning was the first time we'd really had any news at all of what was happening.
Some residents have criticised the UK government's response to this crisis as pathetic and slow. There are also reports of looting across the island as many are desperate for basic supplies. There are large queues for food and for petrol. Help has now arrived. The British military have brought aid and are already re-establishing order. They're working on a plan to try to restore power and water. One woman told me she wept with relief as she saw the plane land. Hurricane Irma's trail of destruction is vast, and yet the Caribbean spirit prevails. As our team walked the streets, so many people told us the same message. They are simply grateful to be alive.
It's the BBC's Laura Bicker on the Caribbean island of Tortola. We will be back with Irma after the news at 6. It's 5:15. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. The New Zealand First Leader has put a stake in the ground over any post-election deal with Labour. Winston Peters wants the party to disclose its tax plans, but the Labour leader, Jacinda Ardern, is refusing to play ball. This comes as early voting started today, with 11 days now before election day itself. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Both National and Labour have been treating New Zealand First with caution, well aware either may need to call on it and its leader Winston Peters to form a government after election day. Labour's leader Jacinda Ardern has promised to establish a tax working group if elected and says she wants to wait for its recommendations before proposing any tax changes. But Mr Peters says Labour should be able to tell him and the public about its plans before the election. He's demanding more details before going into any post-election talks.
Where I'm concerned and my party's concerned, post the election, if they haven't told the voters, we would still need to know with great specificity where you're going to go with this tax policy. Otherwise, we're signing up to a pig in a poke.
Unsurprisingly, Mr Peters has support from the National leader, Bill English.
Labor shouldn't just tell Winston Peters, it should tell the New Zealand public which of its 7 taxes it's proposing are going to apply, what the rates are going to be.
Labour has already ruled out a capital gains or land tax on the family home and has said income taxes won't increase. But Jacinda Ardern says she won't be giving Winston Peters any more details.
We've shared all of our expectations and plans around that working group with the public, and I'll be sending exactly the same message to Winston. We've put it all out there for voters to see so that they know what we will do when we're in office and why we're doing it.
The Green Party leader James Shaw says it's a bit rich for Winston Peters to attack Labour's plans until he's transparent with his own.
Mr Peters has released about $10 billion worth of election promises himself, but he's given no indication about how he plans to pay for those, either by increasing revenue or cutting spending in other areas. So frankly, I just think it's another case of grandstanding.
First stop for Bill English today was at a whānau ora provider in Palmerston North, currently working with 100 whānau. As he arrived, Labour had just announced it would spend an extra $20 million over 4 years on whānau ora, but with that would come more scrutiny and oversight. 56-year-old local Rodney Wilson was at Te Tihi Ruahine Alliance to tell Mr English how the program had helped him go from a life of crime to holding down a job.
You know, if it wasn't for whānau ora, I probably would have gone on the track of committing more crimes, possibly ending up in jail, but I was a bit scared of doing that anyway. But it's the help afterwards that I find really good about them. Because, yeah, they helped me, they made me think about things, they asked me for my aspirations and that.
But would Rodney vote for National?
No. Unfortunately, no.
Why not?
I think Lucinda's got some mean policies, and as far as National's gone, they've had 3 terms to do what they wanted to accomplish.
In terms of other policy announced today, Labour would build 240 state and affordable homes in Hawke's Bay. The Greens would fund free mental health counselling for all New Zealanders aged 25 and under. And National is promising an extra $20 million to develop new farming technology. In Levin for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Housing affordability is one of the big issues of this election, of course. The National Party is the latest to have another crack at it, with a policy aimed at upping home ownership with an extension of its Home Start grant. But this has been criticised as a knee-jerk reaction and misleading because there aren't enough affordable homes, particularly in Auckland. Nat's leader Bill English made the policy announcement at Hobsonville Point yesterday. This is a very large housing development on an old airfield where 20% of homes must be affordable. It's where politicians take you when they want to show you what a success story looks like. So, our reporter, Joanna McKenzie, followed in Mr English's footsteps to find out how the affordable housing is actually affordable there.
It's always great to get out and about in Auckland on a fine spring morning. Despite the hail and rain, Hobsonville Point is buzzing with activity and very welcoming to a nosy journalist. First stop was the Jalcon show home.
Good morning. Morning. How are you? Good.
Here I asked sales specialist Melanie Tracy to do what she does best and sell me on Hobsonville Point.
So the schools were up and running before people were living here. There is a 4.8 kilometre walkway around the perimeter. So coastal, there are bridges that are in the air so that you can look through the bridges down to the ground below. There is parks right through, so there's 26 hectares of parks. 13 hectares is down on the waterfront where the wharf is. There are restaurants, microbrewery, cafes going in down there.
So what about the affordable homes portion of the development, and how would someone using National's Home Start grant get hold of one?
We've got a ballot, yes, on Thursday. So far we've got 50 applicants for it that have been approved by Housing New Zealand. The house is 67 square metres in a terrace and an apartment style. So it comes with a good sized bedroom and a study, and then the living spills out onto a north-facing patio.
And how much will that be?
$450,000.
If you miss out on the ballot, which is part of the government's access scheme coordinated by Housing New Zealand, the property will cost $649,000, and that's above National's Home Start grant cap. Strolling around the streets, I meet Anna Magdalenos with her partner and baby. They bought a house without being part of the access scheme and love Hobsonville Point, but know it comes at a cost.
The housing is done to a really high standard, but it is quite expensive. But that's, I guess, sort of relevant for everywhere in Auckland at the moment. When we moved here, we were prepared to pay the amount that we paid just because of all the amenities that came with it. You're buying a house, but also this area and the people around it that make it sort of more convenient and comfortable to live in.
Next, I meet Deborah Heather, who edits the local paper, and ask her if Hobsonville Point is affordable.
I would say no. I mean, for the average Kiwi family, I don't think this is affordable, really, for anyone, really.
Deborah and her partner Daniel King rented in Hobsonville Point, but have had to move away because of a rent rise. She says she hears from lots of people struggling to get on the property ladder.
I get a lot of emails from people also through the paper who are trying to get on access homes, and there's obviously a huge waiting list, and they just kind of tell me how difficult it is for them.
And a business owner in Hobsonville Point who didn't want to be named told me she'd entered 6 of the affordable home ballots and missed out each time. She gets her hopes up with each ballot and then crashes back down to earth, gutted and still without a home. In Auckland for Checkpoint, called Joanna Mackenzie-Aho.
Fascinating story that, and a fascinating insight into a development described repeatedly by politicians as a real success story. We'd love to hear from you if you've tried to get into a ballot for one of those affordable homes. Whether you've succeeded or not, please do get in touch. You can text us 2101 or you can email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. These are special housing areas, those ballots, any of the areas that must have affordable homes. We'd love to hear from you if you've participated successfully or otherwise in a ballot for one of those affordable properties. Coming up, the first rail freight services in almost a year are due to start this week between Picton and Christchurch, and a woman who nearly got away with stealing almost $2 million from Sky City Casino in Hamilton is jailed for 7 years and 8 months. It's 23 minutes past 5. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. The National and ACT parties have received a frosty reception at a meeting with families of suicide victims after sending representatives at the last minute. 3 mothers who've lost children to suicide wrote a letter in August inviting all political parties to today's forum in Wellington. There was our political reporter, Craig McCulloch.
Politician, can you make the right decision for all of us, yeah?
A heartfelt plea to politicians of every stripe. Bereaved families coming forward one after the other, each sharing harrowing stories of loss.
I can't get my head around how people have to attempt to hurt themselves first to get emergency care. What if the first time someone attempts to take their lives, it works and they're gone? This is what happened to us. We had no second chances.
Yeah, I waited a long time for this because she went through the system and she didn't come out the other end.
My son had a huge amount to offer, and all of that potential is now buried with him. He could have been anyone's son. He could have been your son.
The families want a full and independent inquiry into the country's mental health crisis. They want more funding for health and a target for reducing suicides.
Many of the families that are with us have been farmers who have voted National. I know the story behind some of these gumboots from a farmer from down near Oamaru, and it is a sad story. This is not about parties. The people who from these shoes vote for all colours.
Only National and ACT don't support the family's wish list. They didn't show up at a demonstration outside Parliament yesterday, and as early as this morning, neither party was expected to attend today's meeting either. After questions from the media, though, both sent a late edition. National, its MP Chris Finlayson.
Overwhelmingly, the message that I have heard from you today is the need for action. Action on many, many fronts.
But not everyone there was receptive to his comments. A 16-year-old suicide survivor speaking up.
Do you think I'm stupid? I can see right through your bullshit, mate. I'm not fooling. I can't even vote. I'm a kid. I see right through it, mate.
Another in the audience asked Chris Finlayson whether National would commit to a mental health inquiry.
There are so many issues. I would be concerned, and the government would be concerned, that an overarching inquiry could be slow and cumbersome. There are many matters that need to be looked at, and the government wants to get on with them now.
What you're doing currently isn't working. Our people are dying. Our figure's 606 empty shoes.
And it wasn't just here that National came under pressure over suicide. Its MP and chair of the Health Select Committee, Simon O'Connor, yesterday claimed on Facebook that the Labour leader was happy to encourage the suicides of the elderly, disabled and sick, a reference to her stance on euthanasia. Jacinda Ardern says they're two very different issues, and to confuse them is offensive to the families of suicide victims.
I respect anyone's right to hold their own personal view on euthanasia, but to compare it to suicide is wrong, and I think probably those who are affected by it would think that was the case too.
National's leader, Bill English, is distancing himself from his MP's comments, texting him this morning to say National doesn't link euthanasia and suicide. Meanwhile, the Greens today announced they'd fund free counselling for all New Zealanders aged 25 and under as part of a $260 million youth mental health package. From Wellington for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
A woman who nearly got away with stealing almost $2 million from Sky City Casino in Hamilton, where she used to work, has been sent to jail. Alarm bells only started ringing when Tessa Grant was arrested for stealing just under $800,000 from her new workplace, Waikato Diocesan School for Girls. The 41-year-old who stole and defrauded her employer to feed an obsession with all things equestrian was today sentenced to 7 years and 8 months in jail. Our Waikato reporter Andrew McRae was at the Hamilton District Court.
Tessa Grant worked at the casino as its finance and then general manager before going to the school as its commercial manager. She had the trust of her employers, but the Crown Prosecutor Ross Douch says it turned out to be a massive breach of that trust.
Businesses like Sky City don't necessarily entrust their employees with their finances and are entitled to expect the highest levels of integrity in return.
At Sky City, Grant used 66 company cheques to get about $1.6 million. The other $300,000 came from mainly cash withdrawals. At the school, she falsified invoices, forged minutes and withdrew money, all for personal gain. Ross Douch says Grant portrayed herself as being independently wealthy and was someone who wanted to become big in the equestrian world. But all she proved was she had expensive tastes.
She paid $282,000 for a horse truck when she was employed at Sky City, and while she was at Diocesan she'd signed up to buy another one to a total value of about $485,000, with the obvious expectation that continued defalcation from the school would pay for that excess on her part.
Mr Douch claimed Grant showed no remorse apart from getting caught, and he reminded the judge of just how blatant her offending was.
On a single day, this defendant took $120,000 cash out of the Sky City reserves for her own purposes.
Grant's lawyer, Guy Foley, says his client is abjectly remorseful.
Perceived need, I think I've set it out in my written submissions, became greed. Mr Douch hasn't used that word, but I have, because it clearly on the summaries of facts and on the offending did become greed, and that was wrong. and that's why this woman must go to prison.
Sky City Casino began investigating Grant's time at the company after hearing she'd been charged with fraud at Waikato Diocesan School. Erica Jenkin is Sky's General Manager for Audit and Risk. She told the court that Grant had an intimate understanding of all its financial systems and processes.
This also meant that Miss Grant was able to abuse her position of trust to get around Sky City's system, and sadly this is what she did.
Judge Philip Connell described Grant's offending as sophisticated, and he also questioned her remorse.
That isn't demonstrated on the documentation I've had, and not demonstrated in documents that I would have thought you had an opportunity to express that in a sincere way. Largely you have sought to minimise and justify your offending.
Judge Connell jailed Grant for 7 years and 8 months and set a minimum period in prison of half that time. I kirikiri roa for Checkpoint, ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Coming up, the death toll from Mexico's 8.1 magnitude quake stands at 91, more than 2 million people affected. A Christchurch Airbnb gutted by fire, and thousands gather on the streets of Wellington today to celebrate the beginning of Te Wiki o Te Reo Maori. But before all of that, coming to us from Wellington this week, Katrina Batten with the headlines.
2 men have been charged with the murder of Christchurch man Bradley Lomax. The body of the 24-year-old was found beside the Ire Stream north of Christchurch last Monday. The men will appear in the Christchurch District Court tomorrow. A weakening Hurricane Irma has been lashing Florida's Gulf Coast, bringing widespread flooding and leaving millions without power. Irma has been downgraded to a Category 2 storm, but the winds can tear off roofs and topple power poles. One death has been confirmed and 170,000 people remain in emergency shelters. Auckland Transport has revealed that more than 14,000 customers have lost their cash top-ups that should have been added to their AT Hop travel cards. The council's transport agency says the lost top-ups come to more than $340,000 in a 12-month period. The Labour leader, Jacinda Ardern, says she won't be giving Winston Peters any more details about her party's tax plans as part of any potential coalition negotiations. The New Zealand First leader says he'll only form a government with Labour if he was told the full scope of the party's tax plans. Ms Ardern says she'd be waiting for the recommendations of a tax working group if elected. The 10 Malaysian tourists caught up in a house fire in Christchurch last night are still in hospital. The home they were renting in the suburb of Sumner through Airbnb was gutted by fire, leaving the group with burns and smoke inhalation. A Hamilton court has heard how a woman who stole nearly $2.5 million used some of it to buy 2 horse trucks. 41-year-old Tessa Grant defrauded Hamilton's Sky City Casino of $1.9 million and took just under $800,000 from Waikato Diocesan School. She's been sent to prison for nearly 8 years. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thanks very much, Katrina. I should say before 6 also we're going to look at the return of rail freight services between Picton and Christchurch. That is a thing, that track is reopening after last November's earthquake. But beside me in the studio in Auckland, looking like you had a fantastic weekend, Nona.
I did. I had a real good time.
Yeah, you had a sparkle in your eyes. We're talking business with Nona. Peltier, New Zealand Post's profit is down, but the mail operation is back in the black.
Yeah, well, their profit is partly down because they sold their stake, part of their stake in Kiwi Bank to ACC and Superfund last year. Right. So they've had to sort of share that profit around, and therefore they made less. So they only made, let's see, about $93 million, which is still pretty darn good, but that's quite a lot down.
So that's the reduced dividend, right?
Yeah, yeah. But they took the money that they received from the Superfund and ACC, reinvested into their business, paid down debt, managed to turn a pretty good profit out of their mail operation, tripled their profit level to $27 million, so pretty good. And the main reason they did that was, you might think, oh, it's a bit puzzling, mail, but more online shoppers. Yeah. And they're making good return on that.
They've really worked on that market, haven't they?
They really have.
Actually, and also they've worked very closely with the union and their own staff, and I hope that I'm up to date there, because sometimes those relationships change. But things like the delivery of my food bag on Sunday nights, right?
Oh,
so,
right.
you know,
they
have absolutely had to kind of start from the ground up, look for new contacts, look for new ways of retaining staff and doing a different take on what they've always done.
Yeah, so they still have, you know, your standard delivery, but in terms of those special deliveries, they've changed those things around. They don't deliver packages every day, for example. They do have premium courier, but they don't have, what was it called, Fast Post?
Fast Post, yeah.
Yeah, they don't have that, and they're going to get
That's
rid
because
of that
you
one.
didn't, well, the fact you didn't know what it was called now is
Well, I don't.
problematic.
When was the last time you actually mailed a letter? Come on.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, online shopping, I don't know, do you do that, John? Do you online shop?
Yeah, from time to time. I'm a big fan of the poor old retailer who's paying the rent in our community.
Well, I'm one of those. I love to bargain hunt, look for second-hand, you know, deals.
Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing at all wrong with that. It's all good fun.
Sam Morgan, known as. Okay, right.
Now, that might have something to do with the reason why these e-cards, electronic card sales over the last August were down. Well, for the fourth month in a row. So they fell a seasonally adjusted 0.2%. Now, you might not think that's a lot, but actually it all adds up, especially since there was a fall also in July of 0.6, and there were falls in the 2 months previously. So what does that tell us? Surely we're not all buying things online. It could be that people are just spending less in the shops and using their credit card less. Could be that they're paying down debt. But some economists think it's a reflection of the slowdown in the housing market. So, you know, the houses aren't moving as much, so people aren't buying new things for their homes because they're not shifting.
There's two things at work there, isn't there? The economists are saying one is that people don't feel the same buoyancy because they're not seeing their equity racing up, and two, the people excluded from the housing market are just crippled by the cost of rent or saving to try and get a deposit, right?
Could be that, yeah. Yes, it could be a number of things. But so it's not a very positive indicator. On the other hand, part of the reason why the numbers have fallen is because of fuel prices. Now, I don't have a car, but I think that fuel prices have been relatively low. They may be creeping up again because we've seen that with Cyclone Harvey, that there was some impact there on futures for gasoline, petrol, as we would say in New Zealand. Don't want anybody saying anything about Americanisms, but we were talking about America, so I think it's okay. Now, what happened in the markets, you might ask? Well, actually, something a little odd that doesn't happen every day. Our NZX Top 50 Index was steady with Friday's close, which means, though it moved through the day, it actually ended on the same number. Yeah, 7,852. When does that happen?
I don't know. I don't
first
recall when
time
it last
I remember
happened.
it happening. Okay, and then the dollar, it actually was a little bit higher. No, it wasn't. That was actually a little bit down. 72.4 US cents, 90 Australian, and 55 pence.
Nona Piltio, doing business here in the Auckland studio. Thank you. It is 23 minutes to 6. The exact cause of the Christchurch fire that left 10 people in hospital is yet to be established, but is believed to be accidental. The home on Upmarket Clifton Hill was an Airbnb, was being rented out by a group of Malaysian tourists, including an unknown number of children. They are being treated for burns and smoke inhalation. Conan Young visited the scene of the fire today.
Standing on the street outside, the damage to the three-storey home on Clifton Terrace in Sumner can be clearly seen. Starting at about 8:30 last night, the blaze left the shell of the home standing, but has completely gutted the inside. The hire van being used by the tourists remains parked on the driveway. Nearby resident Jack Forrest initially thought his grandparents' home was on fire and ran up the driveway to check.
There was smoke and flames everywhere.
And how high were the flames?
Probably around 3-4 metres, really high, pretty high.
So we're quite away from where that fire was, but the smoke was quite thick down here as well.
Yeah, it was really thick and got all over your clothes, smelled like smoke, but a lot of people around, a lot of fire engines and ambulances and a lot of cars parked everywhere, but yeah, everyone was really frightened.
Jack Forrest watched as the people inside were treated for their injuries.
There were a few people who got brought into another house next door to our grandparents who were getting treated by the medical staff, which was, yeah, and then a few went down to the ambulance to go to the hospital.
24 firefighters and 5 fire trucks took an hour and a half to bring the blaze under control. A neighbour, Linda Simsick, said the flames were unlike anything she'd ever seen before.
Incredible sheets of flame. Oops. Oh, just awful, amazing, and hard for the wonderful firemen to control. Yes, quite frightening.
Linda Simsick said her thoughts went out to the 10 tourists inside.
They had new owners, I believe, and apparently it was being used as Airbnb, and there were Asians in it. And poor people lost everything. Didn't have time to pick up their passports or anything.
The fire investigator Mark Thomas looked over the property this morning and later interviewed the victims at Christchurch Hospital. While the exact cause has yet to be established, he believes the blaze was accidental, and it appears the guests made an effort to extinguish the flames themselves. A hospital spokesperson would not provide an update on their condition, saying they were asking for privacy. Commenting on Facebook, the owners of the home said they couldn't stop crying for their beautiful home. In Sumner for Checkpoint, ko Konanyang Tēnei.
A clearer picture of the damage caused by Friday's massive earthquake off the coast of southern Mexico is emerging as funerals get underway for the first victims. The death toll from the 8.1 magnitude quake now stands at 91, with more than 2 million people affected. Television footage from the hardest hit states of Oaxaca and Chiapas shows small homes and buildings completely levelled by the quake, which struck the narrowest portion of Mexico, about 400 kilometres from the capital, Mexico City. The BBC's Aaron Sophia reports.
Clearing the rubble in Jujitan, southern Mexico, the town worst hit by Thursday's earthquake. Rescuers have told the BBC they don't believe there's anyone left under the 7,000 buildings that collapsed here. And while the machines, men and sniffer dogs continue their work, others continue to bury their dead. At least 36 people are reported to have been killed here, among them this man's son.
He didn't have time to get out and the building completely collapsed. It was very old, over 200 years old. And unfortunately, out of the 7 people who were inside, only 4 were able to be rescued. The other 3 unfortunately died.
Tabasco, Chiapas and Oaxaca states are among Mexico's poorest and least developed. The earthquake that hit them was the most powerful anywhere in the world since 2015, 8.1 in magnitude. Tremors were felt in Mexico City, some 500 miles away. But the earthquake was deep, so the shaking felt at the surface was less strong than it would have been for a shallower one. That's little comfort for these people picking up the pieces in Jujitan. 1 in 3 houses are affected and thousands of families have lost their homes. Food and water are scarce and parts of the city don't have electricity. The hundreds of aftershocks felt since Thursday have left people fearful.
A lot of people are sleeping on the streets because they fear another quake, because they fear the aftershocks that have been happening continuously, and it's a very ugly fear that we're experiencing.
The authorities say tens of thousands of ration packs, blankets and cleaning kits are arriving to help the recovery efforts. For the homeless and bereaved of southern Mexico, it's help that can't come soon enough, but will only be the first step in rebuilding their lives.
That report from the BBC. The first rail freight services in almost a year due to start this week between Picton and Christchurch. The track there, of course, has been closed since the line suffered extensive damage in last November's earthquake, which diverted thousands of heavy trucks and many more cars than usual down a makeshift central highway through Marlborough and Tasman. Businesses along the route quickly adapted, but 9 months on, it's clear the path since then has been one of mixed fortunes. Our reporter Tracy Neal went back for a look.
Hello, is Mr. Pink here?
Yep, come round to the front door, I'll let you.
Mike Pink and his wife Hazel bought the Junction Hotel at Spring Creek on the main road to Picton in October last year. A month later, they were counting their blessings that it was still standing after the quake. Nowadays, a carousel of freight trucks negotiate a new roundabout outside the hotel's front room. Mr. Pink says the changes to traffic flow has made it harder for people to stop at his business, and they've struggled to stay afloat.
Nearly put us out of business with the roundabout. We was told in November that it would be minimum disruption and that would be finished in March. So I said, well, we can probably cope with that. It is now September and it's still not finished, and we're virtually out of business.
The quake closed State Highway 1 through Kaikoura and diverted more than 1,000 cars and trucks daily on the alternate highway. Kiwi Rail expects about 2,000 fewer trucks a month on the inland road through the Wairau Valley, with the start of a limited rail freight service between Picton and Christchurch on Friday. Local farmer Rex Gray says that's good news, but the local tavern owner isn't so sure. David Jackson doesn't think it will make much difference.
The truck drivers I've spoken to all seem to think they'll be carrying on doing containers just the same. As one guy was telling me that the rail, the service isn't going to be particularly good. In fact, it's going to be worse. And there's only one train a day anyway, so...
Further down the road, mobile food business operator Caridad Apas has had a rough time. Business was booming from her roadside operation where she made up to 150 cups of coffee a day and served homemade venison pies.
There you go.
The council had to shut down the business after a complaint there was no formal access off the highway. The transport agency helped fund the works needed and the consent was granted. Ms Apas reopened a few weeks ago to a warm welcome.
Lots of hug and kisses. Good to see you again. I hope you're not going to go away. So of course I'm not going away. I stay here.
But she's not sure what effect less traffic will have.
Yeah, there should be lonely table just for one. There's a lot of regulars supporting me. And they say, oh, good to see you, Karen. Good coffee again and good food, good service with a big smile. So, yes, back on track again.
In St Arnaud, where the traffic has been a boon for local businesses, Alpine store owner Elaine Richards is now bracing herself for staff layoffs with the expected slowdown. The business had been helping to feed road repair crews, but she says a change by subcontractors to catering suppliers changed all that.
So that's been a bit of a kick in the bum for us, because we would have them in here and buying stuff and catering for where they were staying, and so that's all stopped.
Kiwi Rail says the return of freight services will be marked with celebrations in Christchurch and Kaikoura as the first trains travel down the line. For Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
It's 13.5 minutes to 6. A lot of feedback coming in. Thank you. New Zealand First calling for Labour's tax plans. This from Alan. If Winston says the public deserve to know Jacinda's tax plans before her announced tax working group is even formed, then as a member of that same public, I want to know if Jacinda did reveal her tax policy, whether Winston would blink and reveal to that same public which of the two major parties NZ First would put into power. Says Alan, with his fingers crossed. But I suspect, Alan, the odds are stacked firmly against you on that front. John, I'm concerned for our judicial system today as a fraudster was jailed for 7 years, while last week a man who shot his daughter dead got 4 years, said David. This from John in Westport, and we do often wonder as we are covering so-called affordable housing in Auckland, what areas where housing truly is affordable make of the prices. Well, John from Westport says the term affordable is just ludicrous when applied to housing, especially in Auckland. And another listener says 400,000 plus for a one-bedroom townhouse in Hobsonville. Affordable? Question mark, exclamation mark. Thank you for your feedback. You can text us 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. It's 12 minutes to 6 exactly. Thousands gathered on the streets of Wellington today to celebrate the beginning of Te Wiki o Te Reo Maori, Maori Language Week. The Maori Language Act came into force in 1987, making Te Reo Maori an official language of New Zealand just 30 years ago. That really is a staggering state of affairs. Today, the Maori Language Parade, featuring more than 20 floats, returned to the capital for the second year running to mark the week and to promote Te Reo Māori. Te Manu Kōrehi reporter Te Anawa Hurihanganui was among the people walking through the capital.
Five floats carrying tamariki from Kōhangarau and Kurakaupapa Māori throughout the Wellington region made their way from the cenotaph to Civic Square, chanting in Te Reo Māori. Thousands of people gathered along the way to show their support, holding signs and wearing T-shirts printed in Te Reo. Tamariki from Rangikura School in Porirua said they love speaking in Te Reo and think all New Zealanders should too.
You
like learn it quick span and like you can easily pass it down. Plus you can just like pick it out and like just speak it. We also learned that like it was about 30 years ago that Maori became an actual language of New Zealand, but we feel like it should have been like longer, like the first time.
Should all schools be able to teach Maori?
Yes.
The theme of this year's Maori Language Week is Kia ora te reo Maori, keep the Maori language alive. It's a theme that resonated with a teacher from early years kindergarten who was at the parade with a group of toddlers.
We're bicultural believers and te reo is awesome and we need to keep it alive and this is where it starts. Are you excited?
Yeah!
Woo!
Kia ora! Kia
The Maori Language Commission says around 21% of Maori and 23,000 non-Maori can hold a conversation in te reo. A teacher from Te Iwi Kōhanga Reo in Tawa said that number is not enough, and this week gives everyone a chance to learn.
To show their support for te reo Māori, this is a normal thing for us to speak our language in our country. Everyone in New Zealand, Māori or non-Māori, should be learning something in te reo Māori this week.
Former co-leader of the Green Party, Matiria Ture, also turned up to show her support for Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori. She said te reo is an essential part of what it means to be a New Zealander for all tamariki.
It's the birthright of all our kids, Māori and Pākehā. This is the only place where te reo Māori lives. It's the only place where it will thrive. All our kids deserved to know their Indigenous language here.
Ngāhiwi Apanui, the chief executive of the Maori Language Commission, said the reason so many New Zealanders are reluctant to give te reo Māori a go is because they are scared of being judged if they get it wrong. Mr Apanui said it's important to give the language a friendly face so that people feel comfortable speaking te reo.
Those of us who are fluent in te reo Māori need to stop being offended every time somebody makes a mistake and actually support them. None of us who have learned te reo Māori were an instant expert. All of us made mistakes and we kept on going because people encouraged us and because people were kind.
The parade is the first of many Māori Language Week celebrations throughout the country. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko te aniwa hurihanga nui tēnei.
Central Otago farmers are calling on Jacinda Ardern to visit their properties in order to debate Labour's water tax plan over a cup of tea. One of the Labour leader's first election pledges was the introduction of royalties on bottled and irrigated water. It hasn't confirmed the size of the royalty, but after scaremongering the tax could lead to $18 cabbages was an example given. Labour said the rate was likely to be set at 1 or 2 cents per 1,000 litres of water for commercial irrigators. That's yet to be decided. So $18 cabbages are out, but farmers in the driest region in the country say a water tax is still an attack on them and their livelihoods. Our Otago Southern reporter Ian Telfer and videographer Rebecca Parsons-King with this report.
I was devastated on all levels. I was devastated that Labour would go so far from what I thought that they stood for, and I was devastated that people were going to punish farmers who were trying.
That's Manyatoto sheep and beef farmer Francine Hoare, who says she's gutted by Labour's water royalty plan. So much that she and some friends made a video for the party's new leader.
Hi Jacinda, it doesn't seem that long ago since you burst onto the political scene. It was the highlight of our week watching you and Simon Bridges debating on the Friday morning breakfast show. We admired the way that you were authentic to your beliefs. This is why we find it hard to imagine that you are prepared to follow David Parker's lead on the proposed water tax and believe that it is low cost.
Well, they haven't said how much it's going to cost, have they? And then they said maybe 1 cent, maybe 2 cents for 1,000 litres. Would that kind of amount, would that be a problem for you?
It's a big problem. So at 2 cents a litre, the Maniatoto, it would be $2.3 million. There's only 1,200 people that live in the Maniatoto. $2.3 million is $2.3 million people around here don't have.
Debbie Patterson raises sheep and beef at nearby Gimmerburn. She says this could be the end for her family's farm.
We can't afford it, really. We would have to make changes on our farm to make that money up. So that would be increasing stock numbers, and my husband would consider moving off.
So has this become an election issue here?
To me, it has, yep. And to be honest, this will be one of the first elections I've sort of been really into it. And really, like, it's been the one thing that's kind of got me standing up and getting interested in it, and it's something that's going to hurt us.
Does it put you off Labor?
Yeah, definitely.
Francine Hoare says it's time for Labor to come out and see them.
I'd like Jacinda Ardern to turn up in the Maniatoto and come and have a cup of tea with me and talk to me about how she thinks this policy's right, how this looks like Labor, how this has gone against what I believe Labor to be.
Now the Mayor of Central Otago, Tim Cadogan's taken up their fight.
Certainly amongst the rural community in Central Otago, it is of major concern. They're really upset about this, and I think it is that inherent New Zealand sense of fairness. We need to do something as a country, absolutely, but how is this fair? How's it fair to take the driest region and say, because you don't get rain, you have to irrigate, that's our way of capturing money from you to pay for problems in other areas? The answer to our pollution problems is to find the polluters and absolutely spank them for it, and also make sure that we have standards in place.
But not everyone's against it. And Alexandra archaeologist Matthew Soul says the Mayor is wrong, and Central Otago's rivers are getting worse too.
You only have to look at the data and you measure the quality of the water at the headwaters and you measure the water down the catchment, and they aren't the same. So what's causing that?
Matthew Soul says such a precious resource should have an environmental price.
You know, if you borrow something, as in the water, if you're not putting it back in the same condition or better, you've got to do something about that. And so I see, this is something in the right direction.
Jacinda Ardern standing firm on the policy.
We do want to work together. We have said that we expect it will cost between 1 and 2 cents per 1,000 litres, but I do want to sit down with those affected and work through the effects on them specifically. I want to work this through. So whether that happens in the next 2 weeks, it will certainly happen in the aftermath, absolutely.
That's Jacinda Ardern ending that report from Ian Telfer. An enormous amount of feedback coming in tonight. Thank you. We're going to just read this one out from Robin. This is a really interesting piece of, a response to Conan's story about the Airbnb that burnt down in Christchurch. Good evening, John. When I applied for resource and building consents to build and operate 2 guest houses for tourist accommodation, I discovered that if I slept 10 or more guests, I had to have a fire plan, fire escapes and accessible fire extinguishers. It's horrifying to think that people can operate a 10-guest commercial guest house on Airbnb and bypass all the safety conditions that attach to legitimate commercial accommodation consents. I thought I would mention this because there must be hundreds of similar unconsented fire traps operating under the health and safety radar, and this should be a concern for other possible cases where the outcomes could be truly tragic. Thanks, Robin. We'll make some calls on that and see what the difference is between, an Airbnb that can take 10 people is fairly large, but yeah, absolutely worth looking at. Water tax, lots of people saying for and against it, as is always the case when we cover that story. No one is asking these farmers how much water approximately they're using each year. I'm sure these farmers have got it wrong. The first woman you talked to said 1 or 2 cents per litre. Well, Labor haven't announced it yet, so it is confusing. You are shadowboxing really in terms of trying to address the amount. Winsome. No, I've just lost it here. Somebody was pointing out that whilst they have sympathy, great sympathy for, here it is, Jill. I listen with some sympathy to the farmers in the Maniatoto. Isn't that a beautiful name? Talking about the way many are working hard to improve the quality of our waterways. However, the fight against pollution must not be allowed to obscure the fact that excessive diversion of water from our beautiful braided South Island rivers is also contributing to the destruction of the natural environment. We need to think whether the type of farming undertaken is suitable in particular climates. We always get an extraordinary polarity of responses when we cover water, and this is from Lex. Hi, I'm a nurse, 57 years old, priced out of the housing market in Auckland. In the past, I had to put up with viewings and property I rented while I was recovering from a heart attack. I would love to buy my own place to have security and not having to move when a landlord changes their mind and sells the house. I heard about affordable homes on today's show. How do I get information about that? Well, that's a very good question, Lex, and it's what we talk about a lot on Checkpoint, that they exist, that there are special housing areas, SHAs, that require and order for the consents and ease of getting built that they get in return for being SHAs to have a set number of affordable homes. But the waiting list to get access to them is usually phenomenal, and that is, I guess, the point of the stories we keep returning to. How do you get them? Lex, we will email you back where the SHAs are so you can pursue that yourself. And Martin, who was clearly a very fastidious and regular listener, says, hey, weren't you guys at Hobsonville Point about 9 months ago doing a very similar story? Yes, in fact, we were, Martin, and full marks for your attendance and the attention you pay. We went back because Bill English was there yesterday announcing his policy. So we went to check up on how much the affordable homes cost and how many there were. Thank you for your feedback. You can text us 2101, as many of you are tonight, lots of engagement, and you can email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi o te pō, good evening, ko Katrina Batanaho. A Hamilton woman who stole more than $2.5 million from Sky City Casino and a Hamilton school has been sentenced to nearly 8 years in prison. Tessa Grant, who's 41, had earlier pleaded guilty to fraud and theft charges covering a period between 2008 and 2015. Andrew McRae was in the Hamilton District Court.
Tessa Grant stole nearly $800,000 from Waikato Diocesan School when she was its commercial manager. Later charges were laid relating to her earlier time as finance and then general manager at Sky City Casino in Hamilton, where she stole just under $2 million. Sky City started an investigation only after Grant was charged with stealing from the school. The court heard the money was spent on a lavish lifestyle centred around equestrian sport. Judge Philip Connell told Grant he saw no sincere expression of any discernible remorse and jailed her for 7 years and 8 months. I kirikiri roa ko Andrew McRae.
The New Zealand First Leader, Winston Peters, wants Labour to fully disclose its tax plans as part of any post-election negotiations. But the Labour leader, Jacinda Ardern, is refusing to budge, saying her party's position is clear. Sarah Robson has more.
Winston Peters says he'll form a government with Labour only if he is told what the full scope of the party's tax plans is. Ms Ardern has promised to establish a tax working group if elected and says she wants to wait for their recommendations before proposing any tax changes. She's ruled out any changes that could affect the family home or the land under it, but she's keeping an open mind about other options. Ms Ardern says she's been clear with the public about Labour's position and she won't be giving Mr Peters any more details. The National Party leader Bill English agrees with Mr Peters that voters need to know about Labour's plans. Ko Sarah Robson, aho.
The National Party leader, Bill English, is distancing himself from comments made by one of his MPs linking Jacinda Ardern's stance on euthanasia with her comments about youth suicide. At a rally at Parliament yesterday, Ms Ardern told the crowd it was devastating that more than 600 New Zealanders killed themselves last year. She also spoke of her best friend's brother who took his own life when she was 13 years old. In a post on Facebook, National Simon O'Connor said it was strange that Ms Ardern was so concerned about youth suicide but was happy to encourage the suicide of the elderly, disabled and sick. Mr English says the two issues shouldn't be linked and he's texted Mr O'Connor to tell him that.
They're both serious issues. They're dealt with in the Parliament. Euthanasia is a conscience issue and suicide, I think, is one that's dealt with very broadly by the political parties trying to find better policy solutions that will reduce the number of people who are badly affected by suicide.
Bill English. Right to Life spokesperson Ken Orr says he fully supports Mr O'Connor's comments and there's no difference between euthanasia and suicide. He pointed to a recent ruling by the New York High Court, which he says found that assisted dying is suicide. Mr Orr says the pro-euthanasia movement itself used to use the term physician-assisted suicide. The mayor of Tampa in Florida says the city is getting punched in the face by Hurricane Irma. The storm has been downgraded to a Category 2, but is still lashing communities with fierce winds, pounding rain and raging surf. 4 million homes and businesses across the state are now without power. Many coastal areas, including the city of Miami, have been inundated by massive storm surge. Julio Ochoa is a reporter and editor at a Tampa radio station and says it's a wild scene outside.
We've been getting a lot of heavy rain, heavy wind for a few hours, and it just keeps getting stronger. We've had some reports of tornadoes popping up. The storm was supposed to come on the East Coast, so a lot of people from the East Coast came over to the west coast of Florida to evacuate to get away from the storm. And then they found out later on that the storm was actually coming to the west coast.
Reporter Julio Ochoa. The regular use of disinfectant cleaning products such as bleach has been linked to an increased risk of developing fatal lung conditions. A study by Harvard University and the French National Institute of Health and Medical Research says using the products just once a week could increase the chance of developing chronic obstructive pulmonary disease by nearly a third. The research involved data from more than 55,000 nurses in the United States. Scientists looked at exposure to specific disinfectants, including bleach, hydrogen peroxide, alcohol and other chemicals often used to disinfect floor and furniture. Auckland Transport has revealed more than 14,000 customers lost cash top-ups that weren't added to their AT Hop travel cards. The council's transport agency says more than $340,000 lapsed over a 12-month period because the top-ups weren't validated in time. It says it doesn't know how much of that was reissued to cardholders who complained. The money was lost when cardholders topped up online but then didn't use the electronic cards within 60 days, which would have allowed the new balance to be transferred. It's 6:05. To sport, and the former Black Caps fast bowler Shane Bond is to join England's Ashes cricket campaign against Australia. Bond is England's #1 target to fill their vacant bowling coaching role for the series starting in Brisbane in November. He's previously been the Black Caps bowling coach and will coach New Zealand A on a short tour of India, which starts next week. RNZ News understands Bond's England appointment will be confirmed in the next couple of days. 8 major winners have been confirmed in the field for the New Zealand Women's Golf Open in Auckland later this month. The 8 players with 14 major titles and more than $88 million in prize money between them are among 90 players so far confirmed for the tournament at Windross Farm. Among them is New Zealand's Lydia Ko. It was a good day for African-based New Zealand runner Jake Robertson. Robertson finished second to British star Mo Farah in the Great North Half Marathon in Newcastle, and then immediately proposed to his girlfriend Magdalene Masai, who finished 4th in the women's race.
She said yes. In the last mile, I just thought, randomly it came to my mind. I didn't have this planned or anything, and I just thought, today's the day.
In New York, Nick Willis won the 5th Avenue Mile for a 4th time. And the 4-time New Zealand Paralympic gold medalist Dwayne Cale has been elected Vice President of the International Paralympic Committee. Koine te karere.
Tonight on Nights, the elephant in the room when it comes to discussion on housing. Why are we building them so big? Not only does it make them more expensive, you spend more on keeping them warm, not to mention travelling to and from them, which will go nicely with this week's pundit, the engineer Jeff Hunt, trying to make sense of the modern electricity market, why we still use some coal, and what would happen if all our cars went electric. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather to midnight tomorrow, Northland, Auckland and Coromandel. Showers, possibly squally and thundery with hail, easing this evening. Isolated showers tomorrow. Waikato and Waitomo, also the central high country. Scattered showers, some possibly heavy with hail, easing this evening. Isolated showers tomorrow. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Showers, some possibly thundery with hail today, then fine. Taranaki and Whanganui to Wellington, also Wairarapa. Fine spells, isolated showers clearing this afternoon but returning tomorrow afternoon. Nelson, Buller, Marlborough and Westland, mainly fine, isolated showers clearing this evening but returning tomorrow morning. Canterbury and Otago, mainly fine but the odd shower possible about Banks Peninsula. Fiordland, Southland, Clutha and Dunedin, showers easing today, then clearing later tomorrow. In the Chatham Islands, showers, some heavy with hail, easing this evening, showers returning tomorrow. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. Coming up towards the end of the half hour, we're going to go back to a school ball that we have been covering, the community supporting over the past few weeks. How did it go on Saturday night? We'll tell you. But let's return to Hurricane Irma, making its way northwest up the US state of Florida, hammering both coasts with violent winds, torrential rain and massive storm surges. Boy, the sea is coming a long way inland in some places. The hurricane, though, has been downgraded to a Category 2 storm after coming ashore on the state's southern tip as a Category 4 and hitting many of those islands out in the Caribbean as 4 5. The danger on the mainland, though, far from over. More than 4 million people are without power across the state, and there have been at least 3 storm-related deaths. Irma is now battering the Tampa area after leaving parts of Miami's CBD submerged after stirring up a 4-metre storm surge. From there, the BBC's Alu Makbul sent this report.
They warned Miami would flood, and it has. Irma's massive downpours and ocean surges combined to inundate the city's financial district. As thousands from the city hunkered down in hurricane shelters, others captured dramatic footage of the storm coming through.
It's probably the hardest it's been all day.
Of power lines being torn down.
Oh my God.
Of lethal tornadoes being unleashed.
Tornado.
Of a roof being torn off a home. Of a smashed crane. And of water surging into town. More than 1 million homes and businesses are already without power.
Well, there is barely a soul on the streets anywhere in southern Florida, and that is because of the risk of flying debris, the risk of power lines or trees coming down, and the emergency services say that even for them in the coming hours, it is going to be near impossible to operate.
The hurricane first hit Florida in the islands of its Keys.
This surge, I'm going to go with 7 feet.
Brian Tribble is one of those who defied the orders to leave his home and was live on social media as the eye of the hurricane approached.
We are in the eye wall. So this category, I'm not sure what category, maybe you guys can tell us what it is now.
The massive coastal surges were preceded by the tide being sucked away by the hurricane, building up the energy to be smashed back against the shore with full force.
There is a serious threat of significant storm surge flooding along the entire west coast of Florida, and this has increased to 15 feet of impact above ground level in southwest Florida.
Hearing a lot of mixed reports right now.
Alex Perez escaped the Keys to shelter in a hurricane-proof building in Miami. He's anxious, keeping in touch with those left behind.
Yes, I have a bunch of different areas of town that have higher levels of housing and lower levels. Some of the flooding is up to people's waists, some of it's to the roof, and that's up and down the Keys, like I said.
Up to people's roofs?
Yes, some of it's very severe flooding I think I going on down there right now.
And up the Florida coast, more are preparing, warned that Irma could make further direct hits. President Trump has been meeting with his cabinet to get briefed on the latest.
Every group is coordinated really well. I mean, the bad news is that this is some big monster, but I think we're very well coordinated.
And after causing so much destruction in the Caribbean, it is here, in the most densely populated city near its path so far, where so many are still sheltering.
It's the BBC's Alim Makbul with that report. In the midst of the storm, a woman has given birth to a healthy baby girl after the hurricane forced her to deliver the baby at home. Emergency services in Coral Springs, north of Miami, were responding to hundreds of calls, of course, when dispatcher Lou Falco got this one.
Phones were ringing off the hook, and I happened to be the lucky one who picked up the line. And basically, baby was coming when I picked up. I mean, you heard mom in the background, and basically my job was to make sure I got the right address from dad, just try to keep him focused, understand what was going on and what was happening, and basically get the call in immediately and get it up to our police and firemen, the paramedics, to make sure we got the help out there to bring baby into the world.
The call was then dispatched to the Fire Service and Assistant Chief John Whalen.
They warned Miami would flood, and it has.
That wasn't John Whalen. John Whalen was actually going to describe the baby's arrival on Earth, a completely joyful and slightly surreal experience for all concerned, which ended with the triumphant. In fact, I think we've got John Whalen. Ladies and gentlemen, I will stop telling you what he said. Let's listen.
We got a call from our incident command system. They said, "How would you like to deliver a baby?" And I kind of laughed, and they said, "We're not kidding." And I said, "Absolutely, tell us where you need us." And they chose our vehicle because of the lower profile. We're in a command vehicle, which is more like a four-wheel drive truck. When we got there, she was pretty much almost all the way out, and the mother of the person in labor was actually pretty much delivering the baby, her own granddaughter, in the bathroom on the floor. And I've never met or seen a more calm scene in the chaos that was going on outside. We were kind of taken back by, it looked like a labor and delivery room, and everybody was extremely calm and everybody was smiling.
John Whalen says both mum and baby are doing well, although there's no way the new arrival is going to be named Irma after the hurricane. Home again. Record numbers of women are enrolling in engineering degrees. Universities say the discipline isn't just about buildings and bridges, but the environment and healthcare and much more. And that message is attracting more and more female students. Jessie Chang reports.
I want to be a scientist or an engineer. I really like programming robots and coding.
It's not the traditional answer you would expect from an 11-year-old girl when you ask her what she wants to be when she grows up. But going to the Wicked Science Discovery Camp, an engineering program for girls across the country, helped Robin Thorpe from New Plymouth to decide on her future career path. And she met many other girls at the camp also keen on engineering.
I thought it was great. I learned that engineering isn't just building bridges and roads, and it was actually like world problems.
Hello there, I'm a girl, and I've got pretty long hair, painted nails, perfume on, and a brain under here.
That's Auckland University's promotional video for women in engineering.
LNE. I could have saved the whales or been a pro athlete, but I said no thanks, I'd rather be a mathlete. Engineers don't...
Third-year Auckland University engineering student Sarah Crowhurst says boys outnumbered girls 3-to-1 in high school subjects like maths and physics, but she welcomed the challenge.
I had the attitude of, I know they're trying to change it and I know it's growing towards more females, so that I actually might even be luckier and more luckier in terms of a slight bit of positive discrimination towards females at this point in time, just to get the growth there, that it might be an upper hand.
The Dean of Engineering at Auckland University, Nick Smith, says the number of women studying undergraduate engineering has nearly doubled in the last 9 years, from about 470 in 2008 to 900 this year. Professor Smith says a lot are interested in careers that help people, and new courses such as biomedical engineering offer that.
You know, engineering we think of sometimes as the methodology, I'm going to learn about a structure or I'm going to learn about a machine. And what those fields are a little more focused on what the impact that technology has. What we see among our female engineers is that interest in the difference that they're making. Engineering technology has enormous power to make a huge difference.
Auckland University aims to have women make up a third of its engineering students in the next 3 years, rising to 40% by 2030. But Philippa Martin, the Associate Dean for Postgraduate Engineering at Canterbury University, says putting a target on the number of female students seems clinical.
Our approach is much more about allowing women to have the opportunity and possibility of doing engineering rather than satisfying a number in a spreadsheet.
Professor Martin credits more female role models for boosting the number of women studying engineering at Canterbury University to record levels. First-year female enrolments have also nearly doubled in the last 10 years to just over 210 last year. Both Professor Smith and Professor Martin say getting girls interested at a young age is key, and there's been a whole new range of coding, robotics and science programs for girls spring up in the last few years.
So all you young girls, listen only to your heart. Do what you want to do. It's never too late to start.
Call me a tomboy or a geek. See if I care, because I'm so proud to be a girl engineer.
For Checkpoint, call Jessie Chang Aho.
18.5 minutes past 6. Amnesty International is accusing Myanmar's military of laying landmines in the path of Rohingya Muslims who are fleeing into Bangladesh. Tens of thousands of Rohingya continue to pour across the border due to a violent military crackdown in Rakhine State. The army insists it's targeting militants. Real dispute about that. The ABC's David Cody reports.
Bangladeshi officials talk to Rohingya people who've just turned up at the border. Many are weighed down with whatever they could carry as they fled. Nur Muhammad talks about the violence they've fled.
When they were burning our houses, killing our people, we fled our land. At the beginning, we hid in the hills, but then they were firing, aiming at the hills. Then we left and fled our land. And as there was fighting everywhere, we decided to go to a different Muslim country to live in.
Almost 300,000 people have arrived at the sprawling camp in the Cox's Bazar region in just 15 days. The people left Myanmar when the military launched a counter-offensive against attacks on police posts by Rohingya Muslim militants. Thousands of homes have been burned down and dozens of villages have been destroyed. The Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army insurgents declared a month-long ceasefire starting on Sunday, but it drew no formal response from the military or the government. However, the spokesman for Myanmar's leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, said on Twitter, "We have no policy to negotiate with terrorists." The people at the border scramble onto a truck to be taken to a muddy camp. Pavlo Kolovos is the head of mission in Bangladesh for the charity Doctors Without Borders.
We're seeing a number of violence-related injuries, people with gunshots and stab wounds, burns, and with tens of thousands of people coming over, the public health needs are absolutely incredible. I mean, they're extremely vulnerable.
Outrage about the situation is growing in some communities around the world. Thousands of supporters of Pakistan's main Islamic Jamaat-e-Islami party gathered in Karachi.
I'm now going to ask my brother.
While in London, several hundred people gathered outside the Myanmar embassy.
The only solution is a separate country, one for Rohingya people, government, and one government for the Burma people.
Myanmar's Aung San Suu Kyi, who won a Nobel Peace Prize for championing democracy, has so far failed to speak out for the minority group. Amnesty International believes Myanmar's military is laying landmines along a narrow stretch of the northwestern border of Rakhine State. It's basing the accusations on interviews with witnesses and analysis by its own weapons experts. An international treaty in 1997 outlawed the use of the weapons.
That report from the ABC's David Cody. It takes a village to raise a child, and as we've seen over the past few weeks, it takes a village to throw a school ball too. Regular listeners and viewers, bless you all, will be aware that we've been looking at a South Auckland school community that made it their mission to take the cost out of ball night. The school was James Cook High School in Manurewa, and the community was South Auckland. Dresses, suits, shoes and even jewellery was donated so students could look good, great, for free, or for as little as possible. Teachers did nails and makeup. And as we saw on Friday night, the Manukau Institute of Technology, MIT, their hairdressing students provided free hair-ups. So how did they all look and how did the big night go? Laura Tupou was there.
About 200 Year 12 and 13 students gathered in their finest outfits at Alexandra Park. Flowing, sparkly gowns, high heels, loosened curls, corsages, young men in all different shades of suit colours, and fresh hairdos, of course. But preparations started much earlier in the day. Sam Tipene Rapana's mother, Railing Rapana, hadn't seen what her daughter was going to wear for the evening in advance. But thanks to the generosity of others, her outfit didn't cost the world.
She's taken advantage of getting her nails done for free, makeup and hair done for free, and I think all she's had to pay for is the ball ticket and her eyelashes.
Which Railing Rapana says her daughter has worked and saved hard to afford.
I thought I'd have to save up 10 years ago for this one night, but she's done it on her own and left me stress-free.
Tonight, she's a proud mother.
She's an amazing girl inside and out, so this is the night she deserves, and she's been waiting many years for it.
Sam Tipene Rapana says the ball was emotional for her mum.
I guess she was speechless for words, you know. She probably, I'm pretty sure she started crying afterwards instead of when she actually saw me, because I know my dad was crying.
Simon Taimalelangi wasn't planning on going to the ball, but changed his mind a few weeks ago. He thought it would only take him half an hour to get ready, but after a last-minute decision to cut his hair, that ballooned to 2 hours.
A high zero feed with plait on top. Yeah.
Looks awesome. Who did that for you?
My sister and my mum.
So it seems like it's a real family effort.
No, because my mum brought me up, so yeah, being around girls really helped me. Yeah, hopefully it helps with the ladies too.
A lot of students had help from family, but some did it alone. Going to the ball was a huge deal for Ben Lingman. He moved over from Australia for his final year of high school and says although he had the opportunity to go to a ball since year 9, this was his first one.
I didn't have the money. I wasn't on Centrelink benefit. I didn't have financial support by parents. And yeah, just couldn't. Yeah, I wasn't confident enough like I am now to go to the ball.
Ben says it's taken a lot to get here.
It took 2 weeks preparation to getting all the stuff I have now, saving up for it, transportation. Financial is the big problem.
How are you feeling? You made it.
I'm feeling pretty excited, and I got butterflies in my pocket, and yeah, it's just a big night coming up.
Ben Lingman says he wanted to look his best for the night, but admits his outfit was a bit last minute.
I went to Otahu to go and pick up an $80 suit, shirt, yeah, all things.
A blue tie. You've got a nice little flower in your pocket there?
I got a flower, yeah, just to make it look good.
Where'd you get the flower from?
Got it from the garden, at home.
All the students were fed, which was something a lot of them were looking forward to. They danced hard and took plenty of photos. Principal Grant McMillan says he's proud of the students and staff for organising everything, not to mention the contributions from people around the country that helped ensure the ball was a night students will never forget. Mō te hotaka o te ahiahi, ko Laura Tupou ahau.
26 minutes past 6. We're going to go to Rome shortly. A lot of feedback coming in on water tonight, as is always the case when we cover water. This from Richard. As a child in the 1960s, I remember a school lesson on the artesian water from the Southern Alps rising in Christchurch. The fertiliser Canterbury Plains farmers were using was leaching through the ground and polluting this water. This pollution was predicted to take decades to become a problem. Are the farmers vocal about the Water Royalty planning to arrange compensation for Christchurch for the costs involved in dealing with farmer-produced pollution, or will they be pleased the Water Royalty is there to do that? Water stirs people up, and Winston Peters and the inability, the difficulty of tracking him down on coalition arrangements also winds you up. Regularly. This from Martin again. We like hearing from you, Martin. Thank you. How Winston gets away with what he does is appalling. With every other minor party, you know who they'll back. This guy's just out for himself and whatever baubles he can get. But if he ignores the feeling for change, his party will be dust later. I'm really sure. Who really knows if he will win Northland back? But he's losing the party vote in Northland badly. I'm completely over him, especially after I had a meeting with him needing some advice and understood only about 3 words. He said, Martin, venting spleen. Thank you for all your feedback. We do like hearing from you. 2101 is the number to text, and you can email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Let's go to Rome. If you've been there lately, you lucky bugger, but if you've been behaving badly in Rome, this is about you. Officials in the Italian capital of Rome are cracking down on badly behaved tourists. They've announced a list of things people are banned from doing near the city's famous fountains and monuments. The mind boggles. Anyone caught misbehaving risks being fined. Here's the BBC's Charlotte Gallagher.
Marcello, come here. Hurry up.
La Dolce Vita fans hoping to recreate Anita Ekberg's famous dip in the Trevi Fountain are in for a shock and a hefty bill. The Mayor of Rome, Virginia Raggi, has warned that anyone caught swimming or putting their feet in the city's ancient fountains will be fined up to $270. And the summer crackdown goes even further than that. People are now forbidden from eating and drinking near the fountains. Virginia Raggi said Rome needed to be protected, adding that police had been told to monitor tourist attractions, including the Trevi Fountain, more closely. There was outrage in 2015 when Dutch football fans badly damaged a 500-year-old fountain at the foot of Rome's Spanish Steps by throwing beer bottles at it. Other Italian cities are also attempting a clean-up. Street cleaners in Florence have begun hosing down the steps of churches to stop tourists sitting on them. Several years ago, it was reported that officials in Venice were planning to fine people who used wheeled suitcases because of noise pollution and damage to paving stones. That turned out to be a misunderstanding. But last month, the mayor of Venice announced he was banning any new fast food outlets from opening to, in his words, preserve the decorum and traditions of the city.
And that report from the BBC Charlotte Gallagher brings Checkpoint to an end for tonight. Thank you so much for being with us. We've got Bill English for an extended interview on Wednesday night, Jacinda Ardern for an extended interview the following Tuesday. We really look forward to hearing those two political party leaders speak at length. But before either of those interviews, we'll be back on air with business as usual from tomorrow night at 5. On behalf of our excellent team, thank you for being with us. Ka kite anō and a very good evening indeed.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Auckland Transport has revealed more than 14,000 customers lost cash top-ups that weren't added to their AT Hop travel cards. The New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters and Jacinda Ardern are at odds over his demand for Labour to fully disclose its tax plans before the election. Florida is tonight feeling the force of Hurricane Irma, which has brought fierce winds, pounding rain and massive storm surges flooding the city of Miami. And North Korea says the United States will pay a due price for spearheading efforts for fresh US sanctions on the regime. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Worlds of Music is a world music program with a difference. Every week we present an eclectic mix of world music, fusion and folk roots from all over the planet. The program includes a variety of artists, interviews and musical